Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman, and today we are going to be covering part one of my 2023 block of the month, which is called Friendship Bouquet. It's a beautiful quilt. There is a PDF attached for those of you who have registered for this class. Be sure also to watch the introduction and supply portion. That's a video that I also put out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'll link that below in the description box. Make sure you watch that first. It will give you an introduction to everything that's going to take place with this particular block of the month quilt, and I'm so excited to be able to start teaching this. Today's block is going to be the medallion center, and it's behind me here. I'm going to move out of the way so that you can get a picture of this. So here it is. Let me bring it back a little bit so that you can see it better. These are the 4 Friendship Bouquet blocks for the center, the medallion of the quilt itself. These do involve some Y seams, and I'm going to show you just how easy creating Y seams really is. By the time you're done with this class and creating these Y seams, you're going to realize just how easy they are, and you're not going to have any issues at all in the future about creating and making Y seams whenever you're doing a quilt pattern. So as you saw, the fabrics that I used for that medallion center were some really bright, beautiful spring, summer type fabrics. I'm actually going to be making 2 of these quilts as we go through this series. And what I'm making today will be using some beautiful fall fabrics, and I'm going to show you this as I go here. But this quilt can be made in any fabrics you choose. In the introduction video and PDF, I've given you links to the resource tab on my website, which will take you out to some connecting threads fabrics, also out to Fat Quarter Shop, which will show you some wonderful fabrics out there that you can use. So if you choose to purchase fabrics, you certainly can do that, or you can just use your scrap stash. And as I mentioned in the first video, because I have such a huge inventory of scraps and a stash of fabrics, I'm definitely going to use what I already have on hand. And that is my goal all the time. I try to use what I have and make these beautiful quilts as often as I can. I do recommend that you get together some sort of a notebook where you can put together all of the PDFs as I put them out each month. For those of you who are registered for the class, this class is a 6-month class, and in the PDF, the initial PDF, I explained to you what's taking place each month and which blocks we're going to be working on. And you can register for that class for simply $25. It's a very inexpensive way to make this gorgeous quilt, and you can even use your scraps to do so. But check that out. All the links are below, so just check it out below. I also recommend, because of some of these templates that we're going to be using in this quilt require a template film or a template plastic. And I've got some of them already cut out. I like to keep mine in a plastic bag, a sealable bag, where I can maintain them and use them in the future if I need to. And I've already cut these up because I used them to create the first medallion center, which you see behind me. And I'm going to use them again today when I'm cutting out the fall fabrics for you. I do want to point out that all of these videos will be out there for anyone to watch. There are techniques that you are all going to learn as I cover all of the techniques with you. But the only way you'll get the patterns for each of these blocks is if you are a registered student for the class. And again, you can register by following the link in the description box below. But even if you don't register for the class, it's still a wonderful opportunity for you to learn some techniques that you might not be aware of and may not understand them, and I'd love to be able to show you exactly how you can do each of the techniques that I'm going to be covering in the Friendship Bouquet quilt. So let's take a look at what I'm using today. I am using these fabrics. It's the purples, greens, and golds. I love fall. Fall is probably my favorite time of year, so I'm really excited about putting this quilt together using this colorway, and this is what I'll be using, but I will be changing out the colors, and I mentioned that in the PDF that just go ahead as you're going through the color selection here and write in the colors that you plan to use for this quilt. This is what I'm going to be cutting today to share with you, and I have done some strip cutting already to accomplish this. So I started with my background fabric, which I'm using an off-white, and I cut a width of fabric strip that is 5¼ inches wide by the width of the fabric. I've also taken the templates, and let me grab my template PDF. I guess I haven't pulled it out yet. I want to share this with you. I've got it in a plastic sleeve in this notebook here. So here are the templates. So make sure as a student you should be getting the instructions, the PDF of instructions, as well as the PDF templates. And the PDF templates have tiny little dots that I have included on all of these elements, which will help us to put together the Y seams. And these are some of the elements we're going to be using. You'll want to trace all of these. Make sure when you print this PDF of the templates that you print it at 100% so that each of these elements actually prints out at the correct size. Most printers default to fit to page, and that will often shrink up each of the elements, and you don't want that to happen. So make sure you print to 100%, and that way all of these elements will print out properly. Then you're going to want to trace them. Let me see if I can find, so here is the D template. What I have done is I've taken my template film, I laid it over top of these elements, and I traced on the dotted line, and then cut out on the dotted line, and then mark them. I kind of have them smeared a little bit, but this is the D template. And so the dotted lines are the cutting lines. You do not want to cut on the solid line, because then you've eliminated your seam allowance. This area right here is that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you need that on each and every template. So I've gone ahead and traced them all. So I have each and every template needed, and they're all right here, I believe. So I have A, B, C, D, and E. I believe there is an F, but I am going to use my easy angle ruler to make this F, and I'm going to use, these are just 3-inch squares for the H templates, and I'm not going to bother tracing that because I can literally just cut that with my ruler. So back to the light background fabric for the center medallion, and these are 2 templates that need to be cut from the light background fabric. This is E and D. I need a total of, I believe it's 4 E's and 4 D's. And this, with the fabric strip, is on the fold, and I have folded it one more time. Therefore, I have 4 layers here, and I am simply going to line this up. And you'll notice I have drawn an arrow parallel to the edge, and that is the grain line. I want to make sure that I keep things on grain. So I'm lining this up on this edge. And when I trace this out, then cut it with a ruler, I'll have a total of 4 templates here. I'm going to lay the D right here. They're actually mirror images. And I'm going to trace this one, and when I cut it out, there will be a total of 4. So between these 2 cuts, I'm going to have a total of 4 E's and 4 D's. And I'll show you that here. So I've just used a disappearing pen on my fabric, and I've actually drawn it on the right side, which is going to be fine because that will be the cut line. But I've traced the E here, and the D I've lined up right next to it and traced this section. And now what I'll do is use my rotary cutter and a ruler and cut this out. I am not going to cut around these plastic film pieces because I can distort. I can not cut into the plastic film so easily and distort them, and then they're no longer really accurate. So I'm simply going to use my rotary cutter and this ruler and cut along there. There. Whoops. And again, I have this folded basically twice. So I've got a new blade in here, but I'm having some issues getting it to go through everything. Guess I need to press harder. All right, so I have that cut. And EQ8 always creates rounded edges on some of these points that you'll notice how it cuts this off. What it's doing is just trimming away some of the dog ears, which is a great thing to do. It helps eliminate a lot of that excess fabric that you don't need in your seam allowances. So I'm going around and I am simply cutting off those edges, as you can see there. Just following those little marks. There we go. And there's the other one. All right, so move that all aside. So I have a total of 8 pieces here. All right, I've got them organized so that they're all facing up, right sides up. I have 4 Ds and 4 Es. So that part is ready to go. Now I'm going to go on to the next template and get it cut. The next fabric color that I have cut is my green. And I've cut a 3-inch width of fabric strip for this G template. And this is the stem of that flower that's going to go in between those E and Ds. And you'll notice on this, I'm trying to make sure you can see this, I have a line in the center. And this, it's important that this template be placed on the straight of grain on your fabric. The best way to get this accomplished is to lay this template right down the center of your strip. And I'm going to go ahead and trace it with my pen, and then I'm going to cut it out. I have this width of fabric folded, so there's actually 4 layers here. Once I trace this and use my ruler to cut it with my rotary cutter after I've traced it, then I'll have a total of 4 of the G templates. So as you can see here, I have traced the G template down the middle of the 3-inch wide width of fabric strip. I've used, once I traced it, then I used my rotary cutter and my ruler to trim away these outside edges. I've trimmed away the excess fabric down there, and now I'm going to cut away on the traced line the top of this template G. There we go. Now I have 4 of my G templates ready to go. And so they are going to go with the E and the D template. So let me lay this out and show you how these are going to go together. I have all my templates and my E's and D's there, and here are my G's. And what we're going to be doing is creating, let me bring this closer to you, it's going to end up being a little 7.5-inch square unit when we're done. We're going to be placing this G in between an E and a D, just like that. And if you lay it on your mat, what you're looking for is when it's finished, it's going to end up being 7.5 inches. Make sure that you're not putting 2 E outside triangles together. That's not going to work. It'll be very cattywampus. You need to make sure that you have an E and a D, and that it measures out that 7.5 inches. And this is just a simple way to make sure that you have that done. What I'm going to do then is flip it over and match up these edges here and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance there. I'll bring that over and press the seam allowance open, and then bring this side over, sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that side, press it open. You can either press it toward the dark or press the seam allowance open. I find that sometimes it works better on these if you press the seam allowances open once you finished it. Once that is done, you're going to square this unit up to 7.5 inches. So let me go ahead and sew these 2 seam allowances, and I'm going to do it for all 4 blocks because we are creating 4 of these blocks. And I'll get this back to the tabletop here in just a minute. I've completed all 4 of these blocks with my light background and my green G, so E, D, and G. And I have 4 of them, and they have all been squared up. I believe it was to 7.5 inches for each of these, 7.5 inches. I can set these aside. Now I'm going to start working on the square and the square units next. With my yellow and my blue 3-inch wide width the fabric strips, I am going to cut squares. I need a total of, let's see, how many blues do I need? 2, 4, 6. I need a total of 8 3-inch squares of the blue, and I need a total of 4 3-inch squares of the yellow. And that's equivalent to the H template for all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my rotary cutter and ruler and cut the squares that I need from these 2 strips. Next, I'm going to cut the triangles, and the triangles are actually template F, and you can certainly just create a plastic film template if you'd like, trace it and then cut it out and then use it to draw on your fabric, or you can simply use an easy angle ruler. It's something that I have on hand. You certainly don't have to go out and buy it, but you can just trace this onto plastic template film and create your triangles that way. But I'm going to show you how I use the easy angle ruler to accomplish this. My strips are cut 2 1/4 inches wide by the width of the fabric. There's a selvage right here, so I'm going to be sure to not include that part there. But there's always this little black, I'm going to see if you can see it better if I put it like that, that black point there. That is going to fall off the edge of the fabric. That is open air basically behind there. So I'm going to line this up over here by the selvage, and this black is lined up on the edge there. So that little black triangle piece is basically over the edge of the fabric. And I have traced with my disappearing pen on this dotted line here, that's 2 1/4 inches. It's not actually marked on the ruler. The 2 1/2 is marked and the 2 inches is marked, but the 2 1/4 isn't marked. So I just kind of followed that, kind of brings my attention to where it is. And then I am simply going to cut, and actually I do need to flip this around, and I should have been using my rotary cutter, or my rotary mat, excuse me. So I'm again lining up that triangle at the top of that fabric. Here's my 2 1/4, that's lined up, that's lined up. I want to cut away that selvage. There we go. All right, so here are a total of 2 of the easy angle triangles that have been cut, and some of the dog ear has been removed based upon this little section right there, which is great. And you could also remove it here. It doesn't really matter, but I do like to go ahead and press all of these or crease them all in the center so that that crease will match up with the square crease, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I'm going to cut a total of 48 of these from my strips, and let me show you again. So I've got the first one cut there. Now I'm going to come over here, line up that black right on the edge of the fabric. This is lined up on that side, and the 2 1/4 inch line is right here. And now I'm simply going to cut, and I can just continue on down the line. So I can flip it over like this. I'm lining up that side. The black is at the top of the edge of the fabric. The 2 1/4 inch line is here, and I will cut. And I'll continue on down the strip of fabric until I have a total of 48 of these. So you can either use your plastic film to create them, or you can use an easy angle ruler and this strip method that I'm showing you. Now what I'm going to be doing is creating square and a square units for this medallion center. And I need a total of, let me make sure I'm flipping to the right page here, a total of 8 square and a square units that are light blue and blue. And I need a total of 4 square and a square units that are yellow and light blue. And of course, you can change the colors based upon whatever fabrics you're using. But just following the directions here on the PDF, this is what I'll be doing. And a simple way to create a square and a square unit is to crease your squares as well as your triangles in both directions. So I have creased the square vertically and horizontally. I'm going to crease the triangle here. And then you can simply match up the creases to the creases on the square, right sides together. Gonna square this up, press it, and match it there. So I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, 1/4 inch seam allowance there, press it open, do the same on these two sides, press it open, and I will have a square and a square unit. Each of these square and a square units, I believe, need to be squared up to 4 inches. Yes, 4 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and complete these square and a square units. Then I'm going to press them open and square them up to 4 inches. I have everything laid out here. All of my triangles are laid out here and my squares. I have creased all of my squares, and I'll crease my triangles as I get to each section. But I'm going to start by sewing a triangle right sides together on opposite sides of all the golds or the yellows as well as all the blues, and then I will press them out and away from the center, and then I'll do the opposing sides with the light blues until the square and the square units are all finished. I will press them and square them up to 4 inches. So you saw me going through and pressing, or just finger pressing, these triangle units away from the center of the block. And now I'm going to add the triangle units to the opposing sides and get a 1/4 inch seam allowance sewn there. And if you're having an issue with your squares turning out to be the right size, it's best always to piece your units with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that would be 1 or 2 threads less than an actual 1/4 inch. And that will allow for the turn of fabric, and that will just make things work out a little bit better for you in the end, so that your blocks do in fact measure what they should measure when you're finished with them. I have all of them sewn, and now I'm just going to finger press, and I will then take them to the iron and actually press them, and then I'm going to square each unit up to 4.5 inches square. I have a total of 4 of the gold and light blue, and I have a total of 8 of the blue and light blue. So I finished these square and a square units. I have 4 of the gold and blue, and I have 8 of the blue and blue. So I'm going to set those aside along with the other patches that we've finished. Now I have cut some strips. These are all 2 1/4 inches wide by the width of the fabric. And these are what I'm using in place of the dark pink on the pattern. So wherever you saw dark pink for these blocks, I'm using this beautiful fall fabric. And we're making the A, B, and C templates here. A, B, and C. A and C are basically the reverse image of one another, and then B has a diagonal on both ends. And I'm going to show you how we're going to use those here. The first thing I'm going to do is cut out the A templates. I need a total of, I believe it's 8 of these. And I'm going to lay this on the strip. I'm going to avoid the selve edges, but I'm going to lay this on this strip. And again, I turn these inside out so that I can trace right on the fabric. And I'm simply going to trace here. And A and C are basically the same thing, they're just reverse image. So I'm going to take the A and just flip it back and forth, plus the fact that the fabric is folded, it's on the fold. So with every cut, I'm making an A and a C. And so I'm just going to trace these on here. Just like this. I think I'm falling off the edge, so I need to bring this up here. And hopefully you can see the purple markings that I have on here. And then I'm just going to use my ruler and my rotary cutter and cut on the lines. And then at this point, again, I have these 2 little cuts like this that I can follow to remove this, all that dog ear. We don't need all of that. So what's really nice about the EQA templates is that they eliminate that. So there we go. So what I have here is an A and a C and an A and a C. So I have two of each of them right there, their mirror image, and I can continue cutting until I have everything cut that I need for these. And again, we're going to cut the little dog ears. Oops, I missed a thread. There we go. And we have an A and a C and an A and a C. Here they are where you can see them better. So I have 4 of each. I need to continue cutting, and then I'll have all of those cut out. So that's the A's and the C's of the dark pink, or in my case, it's purple with the flowers. Now we're going to do the B's, which have diagonals on both sides. So I've got the B here, and again, I'm going to use a blue pen. Let's see if the blue shows up better for you on the screen there. So there is a B, and then I can swap the template around, and I'm using that same line right there. I just have to finish that little part there and this little part there, and continue on down here. And I think I need a total, what do I need here of the B's? I need a total of 8 also. So I have 2, 4, here is 6. I am going to have to cut another strip. I've run out of strips, so I have 6, but I need 2 more of each of these. So I'll do that, and then I will have all of my pieces ready to go. Now we're going to take our square and a square units here, if I can get to it, which is right under here, and we're going to be making little units that look like this. Now what I would recommend that you do on all of your pieces of fabric, you're going to want to make sure that these little dots that represent the exact 1/4 inch Y seams are marked on the back side. So in order to accomplish that, you want to trace those dots from your template from your paper onto your plastic template, which is what I have done. I've laid my plastic template on here, and I've found those dots, and I've placed those on each one of these. Here is my A template, and I'm going to do the same. I'll put the dot there, and that will help me. And I'll do the same with the B's. But what this will accomplish is I will know exactly where that 1/4 inch seam is. You can put an X or whatever you need to on your fabric, and that will help you to identify exactly where that 1/4 inch seam is. That's your start-stop point, those dots. So it's really important that you mark those. So I'm kind of eyeballing where it is, lifting it up, and marking that. So you're going to want to go through and mark those dots. And you can mark them darker than this if you'd like, but that will allow you to know exactly where you're going to place your pin, because those are starting and stopping points when we're sewing. So I've marked the wrong side of my pieces, and I've placed the dots in there. And what I'm going to do is use a pin. So we're going to just start with one side, and the straight sides are always going to match up. So you're going to flip it over, match up that straight side. As you can see there, I've matched that up. And now we're going to go over to this side, and I'm going to put a pin in that dot. So it's right in the dot. And when I sew, I'm going to start sewing at the dot. I might backstitch one, start backstitch 1 stitch, and then sew a scant 1/4 inch all the way off the end. So I'm going to sew all the way off the straight edge. Whenever you have a straight edge like that, you can typically sew right off that. But we're going to start at the dot and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me do that. So I've just sewn the edges of another one, and I've got them sewn to the points here, and this is still open. In order to sew that outside diagonal seam, I am going to fold the block on the diagonal, and that allows this straight seam here to be available to you so that you can finish sewing that. And again, we're going to put our pin at that dot right there, and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way off the edge. We're going to start at the dot and backstitch a little bit and go off the edge. So let me do that. I am going to come to the underside here because I don't want to start sewing out at the point. I'm going to start here, so I can start right there and continue sewing. Now what's really important is to get your needle into that dot. So keep looking until you make sure that needle is in the dot. I went forward a stitch, I went back a stitch, now I am going to sew off the seam allowance off the edge. Get rid of this excess. Let's see how I did. Looks good. I think what I'm going to do before I open it is flatten out with my fingers that diagonal seam. I'm going to push that straight down like that. That helps these to lay better. And voila, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and press these. I've just sewn this one side of all of the blue and light blue square and square units, making sure that last 1/4 inch remains open at the dot. So I have all of those sewn and just finger pressed right now. Now I'm going to go ahead with the other side and get those pinned and sewn. And again, I'm simply going to match up the straight edge right here as I've done. Put a pin there and a pin at the dot, making sure that you pull your seam allowance away, have it facing this purple or the dark pink side. Pin right there and then sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do that on all of these, and then I'll bring it back to the tabletop, and then we will actually construct the Y seam there. And at this point, I have all of the rest of them sewn. The side borders are sewn and just finger pressed right now. And what I'm going to do is take each block and I'm going to just fold it on the diagonal, which, like I mentioned before, allows this outer border here, that seam allowance remains open and free so that you can literally stitch that. I am pushing all of the seam allowances away from the border itself. I'm going to stitch from this dot right here, 1/4 inch, all the way off the edge. I'm going to do that on every single one of these and finish that up. And here is what it looks like. I've got it pinned, and the seam allowances are facing away from the border itself, which frees it up so that I can stitch from here to here. I'm going to go ahead and stitch that, and I'll bring it back and show it to you. All right, here it is. I've stitched it. Let's open it and see what it looks like. Not bad. So again, I'm going to show you how I like to press it. All of the diagonal seams, I press open. So do that. I'm just finger pressing now, and I will take it to the ironing board. Then press this square so that it lays nicely onto that diagonal seam. And that will allow this to lay beautifully. And there you go. I am missing a bit of my points here, so I'm not happy with that. I'm going to have to address that. I don't like losing my points, so I've got too much of a seam allowance, so I'm going to have to fix that. But my Y seam here is beautiful. So this one is finished. They do need to be pressed and squared up to 5.5 inches square, and do all 8 of these just like this. Now we've got 4 of these yellow and blue, light blue background or light background for the corners. They need to be finished. They're done in a little bit different way. You're going to sew the yellow ones, in my case gold,
to, in my case, purple. Pink is what's shown in the description, and your color may be completely different. But these 2 units are going to be sewn to 2 of the adjacent sides of this unit. And then we're going to sew the diagonal end here. And then we're going to be putting green down here. So the process for this is the same as before. You're simply going to line this up, do one side at a time, and just make sure that the blue that's extending off there is pretty much even. And I don't really use pens at all anymore, but I am using pins for your benefit here. And I'm putting the pin right in the dot. And I will simply sew from dot to dot. In this case, you will not sew off either end. You'll sew from dot to dot. And then once that's sewn, remove the pins. So let's pretend that's sewn here and ready to go. Then you're going to attach this side. And again, you're going to place it on there. Attach your pins. And I don't have this laying here properly, but I will when I actually sew it. Put this one over here, and you'll again sew from dot to dot and stop at those dots, just like I've shown you before. And then you'll remove those and finger press this open, and then we're going to do this diagonal seam the exact same way that we did this diagonal seam. Same technique. So we'll do that next. But first I'm going to sew all of these straight edges on all 4 of my gold blue units. I'll get that done, and then we'll do the diagonal seams. I just like to do them in assembly line or chain stitch, if you will. I just wanted you to see I've got one of these B units attached, and now I'm going to attach the next B unit right here. So I've finger pressed that away. This will go right in here. And I'm not going to pin, I'm just going to take it up there, but you're going to want to pin, and then again sew from dot to dot, stopping at those dots. You're not going to sew off the end on either side or any of these sides for this particular unit. So I'm going to do that, and I'll bring it back and show it to you. Here we go. I've got these 2 sides sewn. I think I ate up a little bit of my corner. I might need to reduce that seam allowance there so I'm not eating up my corners from my center square here. I don't like that. I want to make sure all points are still there. Now we're going to work on this diagonal seam, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with the other black. We are simply going to fold it on the diagonal. We're going to press the seam allowances away from the border, and we're only going to sew one side at this point. So we're going to start from this dot here, and then we'll sew off the edge, just right off the edge there, and we'll finish it just like this one. And then we're going to be attaching some green units to the opposite sides of this yellow. But first I'm going to go ahead and sew this. I'll do that and I'll be right back. All right, here is this unit, and there is the Y seam. And again, I pressed the diagonal seam allowance open. I pressed the square into it. If there's a puckering here, just release a stitch if you've stitched too far, and that will help everything to lay nicely. And there we go. And now I'm going to press that. And then the next step, after I have done all 4 of these blocks just like this, then I'm going to be cutting the green borders, which are going to go here. And that's another step. Basically, we're doing it almost identical to this, but you'll see that in just a minute. I want to point out how you might get a pucker if you have one stitch too far going into the next seam allowance. You'll see there's a bit of a pucker there. And so what you need to do is just remove that one stitch or release it. And I'm trying to do this with it away from me. So I've just opened that one stitch. Now it's laying nice, and I believe on this side it should be much better. I'll have to remove that thread there, but now it's laying nicely. So if you end up with a pucker there, that's probably because your last seam stitched into the next seam. When you are sewing your Y seam, you stitch just one stitch too far. And if it's quite a large pucker, you may have stitched 2 stitches too far. So just start by removing 1 stitch at a time, and it should lay nicely. So again, you're sewing from dot to dot, and on this side from dot to dot. And then I did the diagonal seam by folding this on the diagonal, which allowed this seam to be available for me to sew. And you're going to sew again from the dot right off the edge there. Maybe you can see a little bit better on this side. And it is ready to go. So I'm creating all of the 4 gold and blue square and square units are going to have these B templates here, which have the diagonal on both sides. Now we are going to cut the A and C templates from the green, and that's going to go on these 2 sides, here and here. There's going to be an open square right there, and that's where all of the patches are going to butt together, and you'll understand more about that here in just a moment. But what I'm going to do, I have my 2 1/4 inch with the fabric strip folded. I'm just going to use the A template because I have this on the fold, so I will automatically be cutting an A and a C each time I make a cut. So I'm going to trace this on here. I need a total of 8 of these. 2 for each of the 4 blocks within the medallion center. So I'm going to trace this 4 times along this with the fabric strip. I'm going to cut it, and I'll end up with 8 of them. 4 of them will be A's, 4 of them will be the mirror image, which is a C. And it's just a simple way to cut these, is just doing it on the fold so you get a mirror image. And let me go ahead and get that traced and cut. And again, all I'm going to do is, as you've seen me do before, is trace around that template. I'm avoiding the selvage edge over here. Now I'm flipping it over here, tracing around this template. I'm using that line there as the straight edge. I'm matching this up with the slanted edge. I just have to finish these 2 areas here and this here. And hopefully I have just what I need. Yep, I do. So this is giving me a total of 8, which is 4 A's and 4 C's. Mirror image. So I'm going to go ahead and cut them out, and then I'm going to show you how they're going to go. They're going to attach to the gold blue units that we've created. So I've cut out my A's and C's. They are green. This is part of the stem of the flower. It's the under portion of this. So I'm going to go ahead and put these together just like we did the ones for the blue. Same way. Now, what I want to share with you and help you understand is this area right here is going to remain open for the time being, and that will get filled with these blocks once we actually put it all together. And you'll see how this goes together. It really goes together easily, and it is another Y seam, but it's fun. I'm just truly enjoying it, and I'm hoping that you are as well. I do recommend, if you're struggling with Y seams, grab out some scrap stash and use your templates to trace these A, C's, and B's and so forth onto them, and then practice sewing those Y seams around squares and so forth, just to get familiar with it. Once you're really comfortable with it, then you can go ahead and use your regular fabric. But I think you'll find once you've done these, and there's quite a few of them in this particular medallion center, but we're basically making a 24-inch wall quilt with this particular class, which means it is taking a little bit longer to accomplish this. But it is a great way to learn the Y seams, and you're going to be so comfortable with it by the time you're done that Y seams are never going to bother you again. So I'm going to go ahead and get this sewn. Again, we are simply going to take this A and C part. I'm flipping it right sides together, making sure the straight edge is matched up here. I am going to go over here, and again, I'm not actually using pins, but I would recommend that you do. I haven't yet marked my dots, but pretend the dot is there, and you're going to mark that dot, and you're going to sew from the dot off the edge, and then you'll bring it back, and then we're going to do the diagonal seams the same way we've done the rest of them. This will have been attached, and it will get folded, and then we'll be able to sew the diagonal seam from the dot off the edge. So let me go ahead first of all and sew this one right here, and I'll bring it back to the tabletop so you can see it. This unit is in here now, and I don't have the diagonal seam done yet, but we'll get to that. Before I do this diagonal seam, I'm going to add this unit right here, and I am simply going to place it here, and this is where you are going to stop sewing right at that seam allowance, and you can kind of feel it. I'm making a mark there with my seam ripper. That's where the seam allowance, where this seam allowance is, and you're obviously going to need to stop sewing there. So you can mark a little pin there at the 1/4 inch mark, and I haven't actually marked any of my 1/4 inches yet, but I can certainly do that. So I am going to sew from that dot to this dot, and that is also right, kind of laying this up against the seam allowance fold there. That's right there. So I'm going to sew from dot to dot, and then this will flip open and it will be attached. So let me get that sewn for you, and I'll bring it right back to the table. Here is another easy way. I was marking the dots out here with the pins, but you could also flip it over on the back side, and then you're going to actually see where your stitching line has stopped. There's your stitching line. So that's where the dot is. You're going to sew from that point across to this stitching line, which is right here. And that will be your starting and stopping point. So that's another way that you can attach this last green little border-ish that we're going to be attaching to this. So you can either sew from here, dot to dot, or seam to seam, or from here, dot to dot. Whatever works out easiest for you. Let's see how I've done. I've stitched this. Let me get rid of this excess thread right here, and that one. So I've stitched it, open it up, and there we go. So that's where I stopped and started right there. I will press this, and then I am going to fold it on the diagonal, press my seam allowances toward the square, and then let me grab some pins so I can lay this here nicely for you. And then I'm going to pin at this dot. I'll go ahead and pin this side too so it stays where it's supposed to. And you will sew from that dot off the edge, and you'll also come over here and do the same. Push your seam allowances toward the square so they're out of the way. You want them out of the way, and you'll sew from this dot off the edge, and then you will have your diagonal seams finished. And that's accomplished by, first of all, folding the square on the diagonal, and that will help you to get that sewn. So let me go ahead and sew this, and then I'll come over here and I'll attach that. I'll pin it and go ahead and sew it, and I'll bring. So here is a review of what I've done. I sewed from that seam line, or that dot, to here. And I sewed this one first, and then I sewed this one last, and then I folded it on the diagonal in order to stitch from dot off the edge, from the dot off the edge, and then when I press it, again, I like to open the diagonal first with my fingers. I'm going to take all of this to the iron and press it. But first of all, I just open it with my fingers, and then I press the square away. The seam allowance is pressed away from the square into that diagonal fold, and that allows this to lay very nicely. And I did the same over here. Press this first with your fingers, then I'm going to take it to the iron, and it's laying there very nicely, and we have that 1/4 inch seam allowance open there because this area here is where that is going to eventually be sewn, and the other two blocks, the blue and light blue blocks, are going to go on each side. Here's how this is going to go together. We have this 7.5-inch block down here. We have the two light blues out here in the corner, and this is the bud, I guess you could call it, of the flower of the Friendship Bouquet flower. And of course we have this open section here which has that 1/4 inch seam allowance open for us to do the last Y seam here. So now what we simply have to do is stitch this blue one right sides together, from a 1/4 inch seam allowance from all the way off the edges here. Press that, and I like to press that to the border because of all this fabric in that seam allowance. So I press that toward the border. I'll show you that here in a minute. Then you're going to take this one, and again you're going to line it up and do your stitch, your 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across both edges, all the way off each edge. And then the last thing that we're going to do is attach this block to this side, and then we'll do a diagonal and attach it to this side, just like we've done with some of these diagonals. And you'll see how easy this is. And then we'll have one of the 4 Friendship Bouquet blocks done. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to line this up, sew it, 1/4 inch seam allowance here, press it. I'm going to line this up, sew it, press it, and then it will be ready, just like I've done with this one already. So this one has already been sewn and pressed. I sewed it here, left that seam allowance open. These can be stitched right off both edges. This one right here, sewed all the way off the edge, and then I can attach this. These are sewn. I've sewn these units on, and I'm going to finger press it toward the green border. Here's another one, and I will finger press it toward the green border. And once that is pressed, then it can be attached here. This one is pressed, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to attach this unit with a Y seam up here to these 3 corners here. And it's very simple. We've actually already done this same technique. So I'm going to take this flower unit here, or the stem I should say, and just go ahead and pin it along the edge here. And what you're going to want to do is, I didn't mark my dot here. There should be a dot marked on at the 1/4 inch mark there. I'm eyeballing it, but there should be a dot on the stem on the underside. And that you're going to line up with the dot in the seam allowance underneath. So I'm just moving that out of the way, and I'm going to stitch from dot all the way across to the edge. And I'll allowing that 1/4 inch seam allowance to remain open. So from dot all the way across, and I'll bring it back to the tabletop. Before I sew that seam allowance, I do want to point out that under here, this is where the stem is matching up to the upper part of that stem. You want to make sure that it's creating an X right there at the 1/4 inch mark. Make sure that you pin that. That way that stem will match up beautifully with the top portion of it. This will make more sense in just a moment. I'll bring it back here to show you. But I've made sure when I open this up, let me see if I can pin it differently so that I can open this and show you. When you flip this open, it's kind of creating a bit of an X mark there. So I'm going to sew that, and I'll bring it right back and show you what I mean. So here is the sewn seam. I've stitched it across, and I kind of made that, it doesn't really form an X, it sort of forms a bit of a Y. I don't have it exact there. It's not laying exactly in the right spot. So I'm about a 1/16 of an inch off, and if that bothers you, definitely re-sew it, remove it, and then move this seam allowance up a little bit so that when it does open, then this stem matches beautifully there. In fact, I think the more I look at that, it's bothering me. So I'm going to move this over a little bit so that this stem matches beautifully and creates a really perfect Y there. So I'm going to redo that. I am much happier with that. If you'll notice here, that stem matches perfectly there. It creates a bit of a Y. And so you're simply sewing these seams straight across. And that one, it's going to go straight across now too. However, we are stopping at that dot right there. But it's kind of cool how we're actually creating a Y seam there without even having to worry about it. It just is an automatic thing. Let's take a look at how this is going to go together. I think the first thing that you might want to do is match up the green stems there so that they actually do sew correctly. And I'm going to try and pin this sideways so I can show you what it looks like. And actually, I don't think I have that pinned right, so let me move. There we go. I've got it pinned like that. I want those two seams to match perfectly, so I'm going to pin that right there. I'm going to pin this down on the end. And then I'm finding my dot, which is right over here, and I'm going to pin at that point. So I'm going to sew, and I'm folding it in half this time. And I'm going to sew off the edge here, and I'm going to probably start at the dot here and just sew all the way off the edge to finish that last seam for this block. And here is the block. I'm just wanting to make sure that you can see the whole thing here. Maybe I'll bring this up a little bit. So our stem walks into this area right here, which is creating the underside of this flower bud. And here's some more flower buds. So the corner unit is yellow and these two side units are blue. And the center of the medallion will be these four beautiful units here. And how fun we're going to have quilting some beautiful motifs in those areas, because all around this center section we'll have these beautiful cream colored, in my case it's cream, and I can do some beautiful motifs on all of that. I can't wait to do some quilting on this. But here is one block. You're going to finish all four of them, so finish 3 more of them, and then you're going to be able to put the whole thing together into a medallion center for our beautiful block of the month Friendship Bouquet quilt. This is exciting. I have 2 of my blocks ready to go. They're squared up to 12.5 inches. Both blocks need to be 12.5 inches square. On the introduction supply list PDF, it did mention 17.5 inches. And when I design my quilts in EQ8, if a quilt is set on point, and this will be set on point when the quilt is put together, EQ8 measures the block from diagonally across the block, and so that's where that measurement came up. But they do need to be squared up to 12.5 inches square, and then you can simply piece all 4 of them together. And it's going to be a beautiful block. It's going to be a beautiful quilt. I can't wait to get to the next session, which we're going to be learning some applique, so that will be our next step. So hopefully you've enjoyed what we've done so far. If you have any questions, just let me know. You can comment in the comment section. You can also email me by going out to my website, quiltingwithlori.com, and go to the contact page there, and you can send me a personal email if you'd like to do that. As you are working on these units, you'll want to make sure they're all squared up. This unit here with the E, G, and D, that should be squared up to 7.5 inches. These units with the yellow and blue centers that have this open corner here, they should also square up to 7.5 inches, although you're missing a little piece here, but they should measure 7.5 inches going this direction. These small blue and square and square units, they should measure 5.5 inches, so make sure those are squared up to 5.5 inches. And this entire unit here with the 2 blue, the yellow, and the white and green, it should be squared up to 12.5 inches. Here is my Friendship Bouquet medallion center for this beautiful block of the month. It's a 6-month series. This will actually go on point once we put it in the quilt, but for now it's a square. We've basically, in this particular class, this part 1 class, we have made a small wall quilt, and I've walked you through step by step on how to get your fabrics cut for all of the different templates that are being used. And this is pretty much the only part of this series, this Block of the Month series that's going to be using templates. The rest of it is mostly just strip piecing. Next month we are going to have some applique, which is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for that. But that once we get those blocks done, once those big triangle blocks are finished, then we can put this together on point. It will be beautiful, and I can't wait to get to the point where we're actually going to be quilting this. There's so much that can happen here in the center. When you're doing your pressing, I would recommend pressing these center seams open because there is a lot of bulk in the center. There are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. There's about 16 or more different seam allowances that are coming together here. So I just pressed mine all open so it lays nicely, and square this up to 24.5 inches. 24.5 inches this way, 24.5 inches that way. And then you are ready for next month. So once this is done, set it aside, and in another month I'll be sharing with those of you that are students who have paid for the class. You'll get the PDF with the templates for part 2, which are these beautiful rose applique pieces. And for those of you who are not students, I'd recommend that you check that link out. I'll put a link below in the description box. It'll take you out to my website where you can register for the class. It's simply $25 for a 6-month series, and you're going to get PDFs each month of everything. For those of you who are not registered, you're simply going to be able to follow along and learn the techniques as I teach them. I'd love to hear from my viewers on the Y seams. Did you enjoy that? I'd love to hear if you are familiar with making Y seams, or if this is the first time that you've constructed them. I hope that you'll all take an opportunity and just grab some scraps and put together some Y seams as I've shown you here today. I think the more we practice, the better we get at those. And after creating this center block here, I think you'll find that Y seams are not going to be as scary as they used to be. So I look forward to hearing from each of you on that. I also look forward to seeing pictures posted out on my Facebook group page, Quilting with Lori, Scrap Up Your Stash, and I'll have links below. But I want to see fabrics that you're using, what you're planning to use to make this quilt. I'm excited to see those photos, so don't forget to link out there on my Facebook group page. And all of the links are below. The link to register for this class is below. I hope many of you will join. We already have a number of people who are working along on this, and I'm excited about that. And I really love to be able to share anything and everything quilting. It's just a joy for me to be able to teach this. If you do like the content that I provide on my channel, please go out and like and subscribe. That really does help my channel, and it helps it to get to other viewers just like yourself who enjoy quilting as much as we do. So thank you for doing that, and don't forget to comment. I want to hear from all of you in the comment section. I love to read the comments. And until next month, I look forward to working with you on part 2 of this beautiful Friendship Bouquet 2023 Block of the Month that I have designed for you. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Happy quilting!